I'd like to go ahead and call this meeting to order. First of all is the roll call. Mr. David Logan here, Mr. Neil Baker, Mr. Dolores Compion.
Here.
Mr. Pat Kiley.
Here.
Mr. Trevor Brown.
Here.
Mr. Michael Rosenberg.
Here.
Mr. David Morris.
Here.
Mr. Dave Yelovich. Mr. Mark Wood.
Here.
I would like to take a couple of minutes. We have a lot of new members on here. If you would, just let us know, even starting with the old members also, Mr. Kiley.
The oldest.
No, not the oldest member, the older serving members. There's a few of us that have been on here a few years. Where you're from and what position you represent on the board.
Okay, I'm Pat Kiley from Houston, Texas, and I have the public position.
Okay.
Dolores Compion, Richmond, Texas. The B license under 250.
Okay.
I'm Mark Wood. I'm from Houston, and I'm Class A license above 250,000.
I'm David Logan. I'm a city official from Canyon, Texas, for a city of less than 250,000.
I'm Michael Rosenberg, and I'm the A license holder over 250,000, and I'm from San Antonio.
I'm David Morris. I'm a Class B license holder from Austin, and municipality, of course, of people over 250,000. Thank you.
Trevor Brown, Chief Plumbing Mechanical Inspector for City of Austin, and I'm representing a municipality over 250,000.
I'd like to take the time to welcome our new members and again thank everybody for their service. Moving on, the next item on the agenda would be training for board members. This is the part that keeps us out of jail.
Good morning. I'm Wendy Pello, Assistant General Counsel. This is Agenda Item C, which is the training for advisory board members on the Open Meetings Act, the Public Information Act, and the Administrative Procedures Act. We try and do this training for our advisory board members once a year or so. For some of you, this will be a refresher. Some of you, this may be new information if you've never served on an advisory board before. So hopefully this will be helpful to you in just giving you a high-level summary of this information. And then in your materials, under tab C, you've got a bunch of resources. A lot of those have been prepared by the Office of the Attorney General, including handbooks, frequently asked questions, and then there's a link to some online training that's free as well. So I think you'll have a lot of resources that'll be helpful to you that you can review on your own time. But today I just want to provide, like I said, a high-level summary. First of all, on the Open Meetings Act, the purpose is to promote open government by ensuring that meetings are open to the public and that the public is made aware of what the issues that will be discussed during the meeting. There's two issues I want to highlight about Open Meetings Act today, and those are quorum and notice. First of all, for quorum, a meeting is subject to the Open Meetings Act if a quorum, meaning a majority of the members of the advisory board, are getting together and they're discussing business that would be within the jurisdiction of the advisory board. So for example, for your advisory board, you've got 9 members, so a quorum would be 5. And so it's, we're much more aware, I guess, in terms of sitting in a formal meeting like this, being aware of the Open Meetings Act and its requirements and its restrictions, but there are some other situations where it's much more less formal setting that you need to be aware of that may trigger the Open Meetings Act as well. Some examples of those situations that may not be as obvious but would trigger the Open Meeting Act may include telephone conference calls, video conferencing, email discussions, going out to lunch with board members, hallway discussions, and text messaging between board members. So, I mean, basically the board members just need to be really mindful of when you're getting together, how many members of the advisory board are gathered together at one point, and then making sure you're not discussing anything that would be on the agenda or would be on the jurisdiction of this advisory board. And that being said, there's some other open meeting concerns that arise even if you have less than a quorum. And the big issue there for less of a quorum is what we call a walking quorum. And that'd be maybe a situation where there's 2 of you that are discussing board business, and that's not an issue, but then you each turn around and maybe talk to others. So at that point, then the conversation or the issue has been walked to a quorum of the advisory board members. So need to be really careful about that as well, because that issue is also, it triggers the Open Meetings Act. And again, it's not quite so obvious. We've set out some best practices in your materials to avoid violating the Open Meetings Act. Just a few of them, not all, but just a few that just to highlight. Board members should not meet in small groups and then discuss board business and then communicate those discussions to board members. An example of this also would be like the work groups. Sometimes this advisory board appoints work groups, and always make sure the work groups are less than a quorum and they meet and just really get in depth with a certain issue. And then that work group will come back and bring its findings to the full board. What the work group needs to be aware of is and sensitive to is they don't end up talking to anybody who's not on that work group about that issue before coming back to the full advisory board and having that full discussion in the public. So that's just a situation to be aware of when you might have a small group or less than a quorum. Another issue the board members should not do is use email or text messaging distribution lists to the whole advisory group, whole advisory board members. Shouldn't send emails to a quorum of the board members, even if each email is addressed individually to each advisory board member, because you're still communicating the issue with all the advisory board members. Another issue is that advisory board members should not do is ask quorum of the board members, even on an individual basis, for feedback on particular issues or comments on advisory board business. Basically, it's kind of start polling, kind of informal voting. So again, everything really needs to take place in the open meeting, in the advisory board, and have those discussions be open to the public. And so those are just a few examples, but just the key here is you don't all have to be together at the same place and the same time to end up triggering the Open Meeting Act. So we kind of throw these out here as examples just to be sensitive to, because this may not be something that you're used to in your normal course of business, being sensitive to these issues. It's something we have to be aware of in terms of conducting government business. The second issue I want to highlight about Open Meetings Act is the notice. And the notice has to be given for all public meetings at least 7 days in advance. It has to provide, obviously, the details about where it's going to be held, date, time, all that good stuff, but it also needs to provide specific details about the subject matter that's going to be discussed. And it doesn't have to be strictly specific, like it, very specific, but it needs to give enough specificity so that the public is on notice, hey, this advisory board is going to discuss this issue. I'm interested in that. I would like to attend. They may want to offer some public comments. And so that's what's important. One thing to be aware of during public comments is, and we'll get to that a little later on the agenda item, there's a section called public comments, and anyone can come up and offer public comments on an issue that's not on the agenda. But what the advisory board needs to be aware of is you're not going to be able to engage in a discussion at that point, because again, other members of the public may have thought, oh, I would like to be there if I'd known they were going to discuss X. So in that situation, you can accept the comment, if you need to ask a question about the clarification of what the comment is, but you can't have a discussion back and forth. And if the advisory board would like to discuss that issue, they can put that issue on the agenda for the next advisory board meeting and have that discussion. So that way everyone has notice that that's going to be the issue discussed, and everyone can attend if they would like to. And again, we've set out some best practices in your materials about that in terms of providing notice. And just some tips for going forward. If you have an issue that you'd like to have discussed at the advisory board meeting, there's an agenda item later in the on the meeting agenda of soliciting items for discussion at the next advisory board meeting. Also, if you would like to suggest some items for discussion, communicate directly with the TDLR staff. Don't communicate amongst yourselves outside of the public meeting. And so that's just one of the tips. Another one is just with public comments in discussion, even if the agenda item is listed, or even if a discussion item is on the agenda, we always need to be careful that we stay on topic, because sometimes the discussion gets interesting and it kind of evolves, and then all of a sudden it's wandered off from what was originally on the agenda. So we just need to be mindful of staying on topic on that as well. So, and I guess the key issue here for is the notice is you can only discuss and deliberate on those items that are included in the public meeting notice. Moving on to the Public Information Act. This is also commonly referred to as the Open Records Act. And this states that the information in the possession of a governmental body is generally considered to be public information and is subject to disclosure to the public. And there are some exceptions in the Act, but only the Attorney General gets to make the determination regarding whether those exceptions apply or not. And the Commission and the Department are subject to the Public Information Act, which means when we receive a request for an open records request, we have to respond promptly, but no later than within 10 days. And we have to either produce the documents or submit a request to the Attorney General seeking a determination to keep the information confidential. But as an advisory board member, you may receive requests for information, requests for open records, just because as your role on an advisory board, as an advisory board member, people might thought, oh, that advisory board met, hey, he's on the board, maybe I can get the documents from him. So why it may be of interest to you all. And so when you get those requests, those are considered Public Information Act requests. And so we ask that you immediately send those to TLR's Open Records email address so that we can respond. And that email address is open.records@tdlr.texas.gov. And that's also on our website. We've got a link directly for Open Records. And that way we'll respond to the request. You don't need to respond. We just need you to forward it to us. That way we can respond within the deadlines. So we appreciate you forwarding to that if that happens and you get that type of request. And the third act I wanted to talk to you today about is the Administrative Procedures Act. This is also called the APA shorthand. And it sets out the procedures for administrative law practice, including contested cases, licensing, and rulemaking. And the portion of the APA that's really relevant to the advisory board is the rulemaking subchapter. And the APA is setting out the timeframes and the processes for proposing and adopting rules, including publishing those rules in the Texas Register and giving the public at least 30 days to provide public comments on those proposed rules. In addition, the state agency is required to review those rules, consider them, and then respond to all of those comments that we receive. Whether we make the changes or not, we need to respond to all of those comments. And at TLR, our advisory boards are very important to us. You really provide that technical expertise and experience and offer your recommendations to our commission. The commissioners are not allowed to have any interest in any of the industries we regulate, so we really rely on our advisory boards to provide that input and that expertise in the recommendations they provide to the commission. So when we do that, in addition to what's in the APA, TLR likes to bring our proposed rules to the advisory boards, get your input, get your recommendations, and then we'll publish it in the Texas Register, get the public comments, and then come back and bring those proposed rules and all those public comments back to you all. Get your feedback and recommendations based on those public comments, any recommended changes that need to be made as a result of those public comments, and then get your recommendations and send those recommendations to the commission so they can consider that, because it's the commission that adopts the proposed rules. So we don't have any proposed rules on today's agenda, but in the future, if we have any on future meetings, that will be the process that we'll use. And that kind of concludes the high-level summary of just those three important acts. I can try and answer any questions if you have them. And
Any
if not,
questions?
and you can always contact the TLR's General Counsel's office as well if you think of questions later.
Would you send out that email to all the members after the meeting so they'll have that?
Which one?
To general counsel, the email for the or your email to the general counsel, whichever you prefer, in case any of the members of the board have any questions just regarding the legal issues.
Right, and I can give it to you now, and we can send that to you as well. It's general.counsel@tdlr.texas.gov. And that address is on our website as well. And the phone number is 512-463-3306. And that information is also in your materials too, if you think of any questions later.
Just one thing I'm curious about is with the Open Records Act, and I'm kind of going, we don't get a state email, do we? Or, so
No.
our personal emails would be subject to the Open Records Act, I imagine? If we had any email communications pertinent to
In terms of somebody had emailed you directly, or?
Yeah. I mean, do you get what I'm saying? Like, if I've got somebody emailing me personally, because obviously I guess my email address is open to anybody who's wanting to contact me for any reason, and then that would be subject to the Open Records Act, so I'm assuming that, because I see some personal emails here that may be open to that open. I guess I'm just curious, because like, the City of Austin, I've got a board that I'm accountable to, and they have City of Austin email addresses, and that's kind of how we address that. And I was just curious if the state would kind of the same way.
For advisory boards, I mean, under the open records, there's members of the public, their email addresses would be confidential, like the members of the department, our department email addresses are not confidential, but I could definitely take your question back to our open records experts and get back to you on that for that particular question.
Mr. Chairman, this is Brian Francis. Mr. Brown, the answer to your question is it may. It's going to depend on the context and what's being asked. So if you get an email that is directly tied to this work, hey, Mr. Brown, Trevor, I saw you guys talking about the so-and-so rule. I really think it's horrible. You guys need to vote against it. That Mr. Logan runs a horrible meeting. You go all through that stuff. And then if there's a request saying, TDLR, we want all correspondence related to the last advisory board meeting, that may be something that may be included in there. What you're going to get is a request from us saying, have you been contacted about the last meeting? And then our staff will review that and say, oh, this has nothing to do with it. This is really talking about the Christmas party they went to. So it may is the really big question. It's going to be context specific.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is the approval of minutes. We all have a copy of the minutes in front of us. If there's no changes, I would ask for a motion.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay? Okay, motion passes. Okay. Next on the agenda, the TDLR has prepared us a video presentation on the public comment process.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sad to report that the video is not available today. We've done the series of videos, but the person that has that information is ill today and did not able to bring it to the office. At the next meeting, we'll have that. It's a video specifically about public comment and the rules that would address the issues of public comment, specifically that you need to limit public comment. Public comment is on the agenda so people can bring up issues that are not on the agenda, and that it is not a forum in which dialogue goes back and forth. So those are the key elements of the public comment video. Next time we'll be able to show it. Hopefully tomorrow we'll have all 3 videos that we've done for the commission meeting. So y'all were the guinea pig. We found a flaw in the system that we'll make sure that we get multiple copies of it so that we'll have it available each time that we have a meeting.
We'll be looking forward at the next meeting, and I hope the employee gets better soon.
We have some staff members that need to have sunglasses now. They've got this cameo appearance and they're ready for the red carpet. So.
I do hope you got John in there.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on. Public comment. I just have one form. If there's anybody else that wants to speak during the public comment section, we need the public comment form filled out. Mr. McAllister.
Mr. Logan, committee members, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to y'all. And what I want to bring up is something that I think is a disservice to the AC contractors across Texas, is that we have this ACR advisory board that is set up to basically kind of manage the department through the TDLR and help, as Mrs. Pello said, with the expertise back to the commission. But somewhere along the line, and this is not a, I think Mr. Logan has done a fantastic job on the advisory board on the time that he's been on here, but somehow we ended up with an advisory board that's not even led by a licensed HVAC contractor. I don't think I think that that's poor. I think that that doesn't shed a very positive light on our industry whenever we struggle to even find a person to serve as the presiding officer of our own industry's advisory board. So again, as I said, this is not a knock on Mr. Logan. He's done a fantastic job and been very, he's been to every meeting that I've ever been to. He's been very participatory. But I just don't think, I think somewhere along the line, we've missed the boat here. And I understand that this is not y'all's decision as an advisory board as who becomes the presiding officer. But, you know, in going onto the TDLR's website and looking at all the other advisory boards, the majority of them that have what you would consider to be occupational type licenses, like electricians, barbers, cosmetologists, breeders, towers, electricians, those people, the presiding officer of that advisory board is a licensed person that's in that occupational trade. So I would suggest that somewhere down the line that this is revisited so that the actual presiding officer of the Texas Department of Licensing's Air Conditioning Refrigeration Advisory Board is a licensed HVAC contractor. It seems to me that that would only be fair to the industry itself to have that expertise from a licensed contractor. So that's all I have to say. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Moving on to staff reports, Executive Office.
Mr. Chairman, members, I'm Bill Kuntz, your Executive Director. We have several topics, and I'm going to kind of skip around among them just to tie things together. But legislative update, we were very, very busy this last legislative session. We were asked to testify on quite a few different bills that would have an effect on TDLR. Two that did not go anywhere that I'm happy to report. They talked about sending the Racing Commission to us with all their problems, so I'm glad that we're not stuck with that.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I think my boss meant to say with all their opportunities.
Yes, and also the discussion about transfer of bingo from the Lottery Commission to us, which did not go anywhere. So those are two large programs that we're not having to deal with in this transition. We did have 8 different programs that have been transferred to us. One of them is driver education, and that came from 2 different sources, one from DPS and the other from TEA. They had different agencies regulating different parts of that driver education. Now it's both are resident with TDLR. We took over the administration of those functions on September the 1st. We've hired staff for that, and we're up and running on that particular program. The Department of State Health Services was going through sunset, and the Sunset Advisory Commission recommended, and the commission or the legislature passed a bill that would transfer 7 of those programs to us this biennium, and in next biennium additional 6 programs. So we are working to do the implementation of that. With the implementation right now, it's looking like March the 1st would be the crossover when we'd have the handoff. That's based primarily on the Department of Health being able to wrap up everything and do the handoff with us. But that's a fluid date. We just have to wait and see where that's going. We have some 70 additional employees because of these additional programs coming to us. We're lucky enough to gain additional lease space, which is right across the hall from this room, so that we're able to build the infrastructure that we need for that. So that's ongoing at this point in time. We're having extensive discussions now with the Comptroller's Office for certification of the budget for these new programs being transferred to us, and we're working actively on that to get that certification so that we have the appropriations to implement those programs. With the bill implementation timeline, we have 1 or 2 bills that dealt with veterans that has a tangential effect on the air conditioning program. The veterans bills provided for fast-track licensing of veterans who have had training in the military of the requisite skills for particular licenses. We've been, I guess, way ahead of the curve on that because of the work that we did when we brought the electricians program over to us. We looked at the military occupation specialty to find out if individuals had the electrical experience in order to qualify them. Then 2 sessions back, we had an amendment to the air conditioning code that would allow us to look at the military experience to satisfy the experience requirements for air conditioning contractor licensure. That's gone forward now to even greater extent to have a recognition in the other states of the licenses for individuals and also for the military, and also provides for military spouse fast-track licensure. The changes to the Chapter 51 that would affect those recognitions are going to be published in the Texas Register very soon. We expect that the final adoption of that would be at the commission meeting in November. So we will be looking forward to working through on these issues for recognizing the military services that really the veterans, we want to make sure that they are able to fast track into civilian population and recognize the training that they've had in the service. Agency reorganization, because of those programs that we have coming to us, those 8 new programs, we have a significant increase in the number of advisory boards. So we've expanded advisory board support. We've got Delia Luna and Tamla Fletcher, now both resident here in this North Campus, and are primarily responsible for advisory support. So they'll be in contact with you about the meetings and things that need to be taken care of on the advisory boards. And then on recent developments, there was a Supreme Court ruling recently that has an effect on licensing throughout the country. It was a North Carolina case where the dental board was saying that people could not go into teeth whitening if they were not licensed dentists, and it was the dental board that was comprised solely of dentists that made that ruling that was challenged in the, all the way up to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court found that it was not fair for a board of the particular license class to be the ones making the final decision on that, that particular license. That's going to have an effect throughout the country. It's going to have a major effect in Texas with some of the single license boards that we see. The structure that we have at TDLR is unique, and we are not affected by that because our commission members cannot have a interest in any of the businesses or professions that we regulate. So that gives us the structure that would not be challenged by that Supreme Court ruling. Likewise, on our advisory boards, we have public members, which gives that independent oversight as well. So I think that the structure that we have at TDLR is significant. I think that what we're going to see as we go forward, the legislature already sends a lot of things to us, but as challenges come up for other single license agencies, I think they're going to be looking at either creating a structure like TDLR or sending new programs to TDLR in the future. So I guess we're an example of the way that government ought to be run. And I think that it really follows through on what our strategic planning title is, Smaller, Smarter Government, because we employ the smarter part. Smaller comes in at the peak load theory, where we are able to operate with fewer employees to be able to handle the licensee base that we have, because we can shift employees back and forth across the functions. So I think the future for TDLR is bright, and I think that you're really performing that function that assures that licensing of these programs that we have will continue, and we'll be able to safeguard both the licensees and the public and do it in the proper way. And I'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions? I do think it speaks well for the agency that the legislature keeps looking to you to take on these additional responsibilities. Obviously, you have been a model for the legislature, and I want to congratulate y'all on a job well done.
Well, thank you.
Any other questions? Moving on to compliance.
Good morning, Chairman Logan.
Good
Board
morning.
members, it's my joy to see you again and welcome Mr. Morris and Mr. Brown to our board. Look forward to your expertise and your input as we advance the air conditioning program here in Texas with the department. I believe you have my report in front of you. If there are questions specific to what's outlined there, I'd sure try to answer any other questions you might have.
Any questions?
Looks like you've been busy.
We try. On that note, I would just offer to you, in the compliance division, we pride ourselves on being specialists with safety and solutions. We think that you hear of first responders, and we know who those people are. We like to think of ourselves as first defenders. With that said, I'd like to introduce the new Deputy Air Conditioning Program Specialist, Mr. Stan Johnson.
Stan, glad to have you on.
No questions, Chairman?
One real quick.
Yes, sir.
You run around the state making presentations to a lot of organizations. When you go to a town where a board member resides, do you contact the board member just to let them know in case they want to attend the meeting?
Generally, yes. I'm thinking of Mr. Rosenberg and the San Antonio ACCA chapter. Him and his dad are regular attendees there, so I know that they'll be present.
We like to be involved with the industry members as much as possible, so beyond our normal workday. Any more questions? Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next is Education and Examination Division.
Good morning, Chairman and members. I'm Kim Witt with the Education and Examination Division. And today our report consists of some changes within our division and your statistics for your exams in CE. TDLR and PSI facilitated an exam review committee meeting in May, and the purpose of the meeting was to review poorly performing items and to approve new items for the exam pool. The subject matter experts agreed to add 2 new references to the approved reference list for the environmental A and B exams, and that would be your manual D and your manual J. Every 6 years, a request for proposal to be TDLR's exam providers published. This process began in February, and after the review of the submissions, the commission approved PSI to be the exam vendor again, and that contract took effect September 1st. Our division has begun using ZCOM to track emails. We currently receive about a little over 1,000 just in our division monthly. So this way we can set a goal and review these and make sure everything's been accomplished and everybody has their answers that they need. With the changes taking on driver education, we've revamped our division. We have Marco Rodriguez as the new team leader for the school inspection site visit section. He'll be responsible for inspecting new schools such as barber and cosmetology schools and the CE providers in their courses. So we'll get that started soon. And Carrie Hodges comes to us from DPS. She will be over the driver education and safety section. And she comes with 8 years of experience in the laws and rules and procedures for the driver training program. So we're excited to have her on board and get new things started. Next is your exam statistics. And I'll try to answer any questions you have on that. And then your continuing education statistics.
Any questions?
Kim, you might
sir.
talk about the new exam contract and the fees? Lowering the fees?
Oh, yes. The fees have been lowered for the exam fees under the new contract, so.
As I understand it, you put it out to rebid.
As far as the vendor for the exams.
Okay, great.
And that was
Appreciate it
PSI once
anytime the
again.
fees can go down.
Right, and it's a function of the critical mass increasing with the number of exams that we take to that vendor, so that they were able to lower the seat times. And I'm not sure exactly which fees there are for the air conditioning, but they generally lowered $3 to $5 per exam that they're giving. So it's nice to be able to make things more economical for the licensees.
Yes. Any more questions?
I did have one quick question on the examination statistics. What are the individual columns?
Oh, I'm sorry. One is going to be your pass, your fail, your total, and then the percentage. And unfortunately, I'm not for sure on the last column when this was done.
The last column are the no-shows for the examination. We apologize for not having the headings on it.
Yeah.
We'll make sure we have them on there next time.
I mean, that's kind of what I was guessing, but I just wanted to make that clear, so.
No, I'm sorry, we didn't catch that part.
That's okay, I caught it.
Okay.
I'm paying attention.
Paying attention, good deal.
So I guess looking at the fail rate, or the pass rate, I guess, would be, seems like it's kind of low there. Is there a reason for that, or?
Kim, let me jump in.
I'll let Bill handle that one.
There are a couple of factors there. One, it's the preparation of the individual.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
the rate that you're seeing is the total number of exams taken, what the pass rate is. So if an individual misses the cut score the first time and retakes the exam, he's taken the exam twice, so your pass rate's 50%, even though it's 100% pass for that individual. But the statistic that's given is how many times the exam has been taken and what the pass rate is on that number. And then if you run into the individual that has a lot of trouble with it and takes it 4 or 5 times in order to pass it, that's going to drive that percentage down. So more people are getting into the business than shows in that percentage, but it is a function of the preparation of the individual, because the psychometricians that work for the provider, that work with us to develop the exam, have worked with the subject matter experts to come up with what the questions are and what the appropriate cut score would be based on the difficulty of those questions. And that sets the bar at the minimum qualifications needed in order to have somebody go into the field and be doing that work. So we don't want to we don't want to lower that. And
Yeah, certainly we don't want to lower the bar. Absolutely not. It just seems like maybe education is the key. It's definitely.
it is preparation, yes.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay.
Anything else? Thank you very much. Next is the Enforcement Division.
Good morning, gentlemen. My name is Trevor Thielen. I'm one of the prosecutors in the Enforcement Division. I'll be giving the presentation today. As you can see, we'll start with outreach. Our outreach efforts are, in addition to those of compliance, we're kind of limited by where we have field investigators available, but where we do have them, they have been active. Our investigators have attended and talked at TACCA meetings 3 times in San Antonio and 1 time in Houston since our last meeting. They've gone to the San Antonio Refrigeration Service Engineer Society meetings 5 times, and to CE classes in San Antonio 7 times and in Houston 3 times. Move on to case highlights, and I've got a little more detail in my presentation than you have there in the handout. The first case is involving Janice Curry Moore. This was a person who had an expired air conditioning and refrigeration contractor's license that expired back in February of 2013. She was accused of 3rd-time violations in 3 separate cases. The violations were a number of them, and basically they were failing to pay on other final orders from older cases in addition to these 3 cases, misrepresentation of services to be provided, failure to ensure mechanical integrity, failure to include the required department info on our invoices. This case went to a default order, and the penalty that was assessed was a $30,000 financial penalty, in addition, revocation of her air conditioning contractor license. That revocation came in October of 2014, and I checked, and she has not paid any of that amount. So the case was forwarded to the Attorney General's office in July of this year to try to collect on that $30,000 amount. But if they don't recover, that's still going to help us prevent her from getting another license with us. I also checked just online to see if there was any activity from her company, and I couldn't find any online reviews, positive, negative, or otherwise, from the last 2 years. So it appears that that company has gotten out of the AC business since all of this went down. The second case, Patrick Scott Jones, he still has an active air conditioning contractor license. These were first violations in one case. Failure to pull a permit, failure to ensure mechanical integrity 7 times. What that really means is that we were able to prove 7 different code violations on this particular job. Also a failure to provide an invoice and using a technician whose registration had expired 3 years before. He agreed to settle the case with us and to pay a $14,000 penalty, which was paid in full within about a month of the agreement that we made. He also agreed to a 1-year probated suspension of his contractor license. The conditions were that he had to take additional continuing education classes above what's required for him to keep his license, and also send us a report of all the jobs that he does every quarter so that we could potentially perform random checkups on any cases any additional jobs we were concerned about. His probated suspension term will end in November of this year, but he appears on track to fulfill that agreement. The third case involved Brandy Andrews. She also continues to have an active air conditioning contractor license. These were first-time violations in 2 different cases. One of the cases was, again, a failure to provide mechanical integrity and 8 different types of code violations. And the other case simply involved a failure to include the required department contact info on her invoices. She, like Mr. Jones, settled the case with us, has agreed to pay a $12,250 penalty. That's being paid out in installments, but she is on track. I checked on her payments, and she has made, I think it's the first 4 or 5 payments of that agreement. And she's also agreed to take an additional continuing education class above what's required for her license. The fourth case, Andrzej Bulga. This is a person who held an air conditioning and refrigeration technician registration until it was revoked because of this case. These were 3 different cases, all first-time violations. The allegations were unlicensed air conditioning and refrigeration advertising on websites and using a air conditioning contractor license that didn't belong to him in some of these ads. There were also aggravating factors that we alleged in this case. Specifically, after our investigator contacted him during the investigation, he took down his website, which is something that our investigators try to get to prevent the ongoing violations. However, a couple months later, we get another complaint. He had put the same website back up. Also, when he put it back up, he put, instead of the random person whose air conditioning contractor license he basically stole in his earlier ads, he put his technician registration number inside of the TACL format to make it appear like it was a contractor license when it was in fact a technician registration. We sought we got a default order. He didn't respond in this case. We got an $18,000 penalty and revocation of his technician registration as part of that default order. Nothing has been paid in that case. I expect, like the first case against Ms. Moore, that after we've finished all of the required efforts we have to go to collect it on our end, that it'll also be forwarded to the Attorney General because of the amount of the penalty. And then finally, we have a case against Jimmy Black. This person has an expired air conditioning and refrigeration technician registration. We alleged few different first violations. Essentially, it was all advertising and performing unlicensed contracting, and multiple times, but at the same location was the performance. He came out, I think, on 3 different occasions. We didn't get any response from Mr. Black, so the case went to a default order, and a $15,000 penalty was assessed. Nothing has been paid by Mr. Black either, and again, I expect that after we extinguish the required hoops we have to go through to try to collect it on our end, it will also go to the Attorney General's office. Move on to the stings that enforcement has been responsible for since the last time we met. We had one in March in San Antonio, and that resulted in 33 cases that were opened and sent to enforcement for prosecution. I imagine because of the timing of those that many of those are still ongoing cases. In June, we went out to Odessa and also performed a sting out there and opened 19 cases. And just to give you the broad strokes of how we do these sting operations, our investigators pose as potential customers for leads that we've developed from either cases we haven't been able to prove, or recent complaints that we've gotten, or just our own checks of the standard places where we see these ads, Craigslist, the classifieds, Thrifty Nickel, etc. We develop those leads and call these folks out to the sting location where our investigators pose as those customers, show them equipment that needs to be upgraded, and try to see if they will offer a bid for that work. And when we get those paper bills, either through an email or sometimes they just handwrite it, or sometimes they come out and deliver something that looks really professional later on, those develop really strong evidence that helps us in our cases, and also helps us coordinate those efforts with local media so that we can hopefully get some news coverage, kind of to catch a predator style. The reporters will confront some of these guys after we've finished our investigation and try to get answers for them, and it's always kind of a embarrassed, shambling, weak excuses, but I think it not only sends a message to those men, but when they do a larger report like this on one of our stings, that's going out to the community and communicating what TDLR is, what the licensing requirements are, and the trouble that you can get into if you do it, and bringing it home to people that this happens in your community. Watch out for these guys. Finally, I want to just point to the statistics. I won't go over the specific numbers, but I did want to talk about some conclusions that I take from some of these numbers. You can see that our number of cases resolved, 1,188, is higher than the number of cases opened since our last meeting. That means that we are catching up. We've closed over 50% more cases than we opened this last fiscal year. That's been achieved for a couple different reasons. One was we formerly only had 3 prosecutors working full-time on the AC, electrical, elevator program. That number is now 4 prosecutors, and we've had less turnover on those positions. So we've had a solid team that's increased 30%. Another factor I'd point to is that about this time last year, before the end of the last fiscal year, in June and August, we were given permission and really direction from our enforcement division director to focus on resolving cases, not to open new cases. Opening new cases really means just sending out the NOAVs, saying this violation happened and here's how you're going to be punished. Instead, we were able to focus in on the cases we already had filed, try to find ways to resolve those or to get the default orders pushed through a little faster, and also to look through our caseloads for cases that were easy closes. We all have, even though there's 4 of us, hundreds of these cases at any given time, and they're not all cases that we can take all the way to a penalty or contested hearing. Having some time to focus in and get rid of those cases is going to help us. It's already helped us. I can tell you it's helped me move my case along. You can also see from the stats that ACR continues to be a significant share of the enforcement division's caseload. We work a lot of cases. We're only one of was it 27, 28 different programs that TDLR currently regulates, but the percentage of all the cases opened was 8% of all the cases that TDLR opened in enforcement were solely AC cases. 9.6% of the cases we closed, all AC cases. So this program continues to be a priority for TDLR, and there continues to be lots of complaints that we need to deal with. Finally, the question we routinely have to focus on when we look at these stats is why do we see such a big difference in the penalties that we assess versus the penalties that are collected? You can see that 14% of all the TDLR penalties assessed came from the AC program, but only 7% were collections, and there's a few different reasons. First off, it shows how hard we're going against unlicensed people. The unlicensed guys, they don't fulfill the licensing requirements on the front end, and they often don't pay the penalties on the back end. But by getting paper on them, by getting them in our system, we know to watch out for them. Eventually, if we can get enough penalties put together, we can get the AG involved to help us collect on that. And I'm not sure if those numbers are reflected on our stats or not. The second thing that you have to understand is that just a few cases can build up to represent an outsized portion of the uncollected penalties. 3 of the 5 cases that I highlighted for you came together to represent over $60,000 of the $600,000 that were assessed. So that's 10% right there from only 3 cases, and we're resolving over 1,100 cases in the past fiscal year. So those really bad eggs can have an outsized effect on what our stats look like. Can I answer any of your questions?
Yes, I had one with the, I'm just curious, it's a fantastic job, by the way, it's awesome. With the stings, is it, did TDLR contact CPS, or is that something that CPS contacted TDLR? I'm just curious how that relationship worked out and with those, both those sting operations, both in Odessa and San Antonio.
I'm not sure about CPS's involvement. Can you explain
well,
what
it just
you mean?
says the sting was covered by a reporter with CBS in San Antonio.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to say local media.
Okay.
If it says CPS on there, it probably means CBS and just a typo.
Okay. So I was just curious how that relationship worked out. Was this something that TDLR contacted local media, or?
Yeah, we call them as we're putting together the stings, and they're often out there all week communicating with the investigators and helping us to capture hidden camera footage when they first come to the stings, drive up, and then oftentimes we'll have a few who come back the last day of the sting, because we don't want to tip people off by confronting them too early that, hey, something's wrong, and then the word gets out, watch out for this location. So those reporters work with the investigators throughout the week, kind of surreptitiously, inconspicuously, and then they come with all the cameras and the reporters who shove a microphone in your face on the last day. And generally, it's within a week we've got a big news story put together by the local media. Sometimes, they focus on a special investigation from this news team. It'll be generally a 5 or 6 minute story that they put together. But yeah, we definitely work with them on the front end and on the back end. And sometimes the news media provides us with helpful video related to, if they got some interesting excuses or answers from one of the respondents that the sting targets that we got, we'll request that video from them, and that will become part of our evidence file. And that's evidence that I never have in an unlicensed case that comes to us any other way. So that does help strengthen it. But yeah, we work with them on the front end, during the sting, and on the back end as much as we can.
Mr. Brown, I'll just add that after there's a successful sting like that with the Enforcement Division and our media person, Susan Stanford, and that local media, they will start contacting us saying, hey, do you want to do another one? Or, hey, sweeps weeks, or whatever the case may be. So the relationship builds after the first successful moment. And then we're contacted to go back, and we try to coordinate having the dates when we're going to have the sting. So it kind of builds on itself. And what we've learned over the years is that the investigative reporter groups, they're very close-knit. They have annual conferences, and they said, what worked well for you in the last year? And, oh, well, we did a sting with TDLR. What's TDLR? They start learning about it, and then all of a sudden we'll get a call from that local group saying, hey, we'd like for you guys to come to our community as well. So it kind of builds on the success.
I guess one last question. Again, fantastic job. That's the numbers are great. I'm just curious, the video footage, do we have that available to us? Do you have copies of the links or something on the TDR website or some?
I can find some. Sometimes we post links. I'm not really clear on whether we've done that recently, but we all got together to watch one of the videos put together from the sting, the Odessa sting, recently, and I could certainly get that, find that link and get that out to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I have a question. Out of the 776 new cases that were opened, where are these cases coming from? Are they homeowners calling in complaining? Are compliance officers going out on spot checks? Where are these cases coming from?
Our cases mainly come from consumer complaints, and either that's complaints about this person did work wrong, or I'm unhappy with this contractor, and I think they may have violated some rule. They also come from the industry itself. A lot of our unlicensed cases begin from a contractor who is seeing advertisements online, and again, it can come from Craigslist, it can come from a classified newspaper, it can be a flyer that they had, they found on their windshield. I've seen cases that start with door knockers hung on doors, vehicles that are driving around that say AC is one of the services from this handyman. We have internally, we open cases when we see unlicensed activity. I was walking out by the fountain out front, and I saw a business card on the ground, and I thought, there's no way walking into TDLR that I'm going to find an unlicensed AC business card, and I did. It was just sitting there on the ground. So I took it upstairs and opened a case that way. Our cases sometimes come to us anonymously, which makes the investigation a little more difficult, especially if it's not an ad that we can verify where it came from on our own, like when it's on the internet. If an anonymous person sends us a business card, as a prosecutor, I need to prove that that business card was actually potentially being circulated in the community in Texas, and when that happened, and where that happened, and how that happened, the circumstances behind that. So we get anonymous complaints, we get industry complaints. We generally don't open any mechanical integrity type cases that are department started, because those cases generally come from most of the time from the consumer, sometimes from the code enforcement people in a certain area. They'll send us those cases. Generally, we develop the strongest evidence in those cases where we're able to send out John Lane and Stan Johnson to inspect it themselves. But we do not, we operate a little differently than the cosmetology barber programs, where they are showing up at the locations where they know that type of work is being done, and we have inspectors out there in the field surprising people. Our inspectors generally are acting after there's been a problem, a complaint like that. Sometimes we get cases from the plumbing board, and a person complained to the plumbing board, but they see that there's also AC issues related to that case. That's about all of the different sources I can think of.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Thank you very much. Next, licensing division.
Good morning. I'm Lisa Hodak, Licensing Manager. I presented you with the licensing statistics for contractors and the technicians, and I have the new license numbers as well as renewed and total population for each license type, as well as the total of all license types combined. Are there any questions on the actual report?
Any questions? Seems to be rather straightforward.
Yes, the numbers are pretty consistent over the years, and applications are still coming in. They're keeping us busy. As far as recent developments, I wanted to mention that we have started seeing some military experience included with the applications. It's approximately 1 in 40, and about a third of those are actually approved air conditioning type experience.
Great.
And that concludes my report. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we move on to discussion and possible action to recommend changes to the penalty matrix for air conditioning and refrigeration contractors. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Advisory Board members. My name is Christina Kaiser. I'm the Director of the Enforcement Division here at TDLR. With me here is Chris Russey. He is sort of my right arm. Officially, he's called the Research and Analytics Specialist for the Enforcement Division. In the world of things like penalty matrices, Chris does a lot of the heavy lifting, the actual work that goes into creating and updating these documents. So Chris is going to assist me with this presentation today. At agenda item H, you have an updated version of a penalty matrix that we are going to be asking you today to recommend to the Commission for approval. We have to update the penalty matrices every once in a while to catch them up with rule changes or statute changes that have happened since the last time we published a matrix. So that's primarily what this is about today. For the new members on the board, let me give you a little bit of background about what the penalty matrix is. This document is used for a couple of purposes. For the people outside of TDLR, like the industry and the public, it is intended to put folks on notice of the possible penalties and the possible license sanctions that a person will be subject to if they violate the air conditioning statute or rules. Inside our house, the penalty matrix is used by my prosecutors, such as Trevor and John Medlock, who are here with us. When preparing a case for formal enforcement action, such as administrative penalties or license sanctions, the penalty matrix tells them what relief to ask for, what amount of penalty to ask for a particular violation, or what type of license sanction to ask for a particular violation. As you look at the document, you'll see Class A, which is the lowest class of violations, and then you'll see for a first violation we will seek a reprimand up to $1,000, somewhere in that range, for violations that fall in that class. That's the range of possible outcomes that the prosecutor is limited to. Now, the penalty matrix does not ultimately control our commission, the commission who is the final decision maker in our contested cases. They can go outside the penalty matrix if they want to, but the matrix is used by the prosecutors to help ensure consistency across cases with similar violations. Consistency over time has been probably the biggest priority of our commission. Let me tell you a couple of things that the penalty matrix is not. This penalty matrix, this document that is in front of you at agenda item H, does not create law. It's simply, when we create the penalty matrix, what we do is we scour through the statute and we scour through the administrative rules, and we find each provision in there that can create a possible violation that someone can be prosecuted for. And then we lift all those violations out and we plop them into the penalty matrix and we organize them according to how serious they are. So as we walk through the matrix, you'll see that the violations are separated by class, with, as I said, Class A being the least serious and more serious as you move up through each class. It is important to, sometimes when we get into these discussions, we lapse into a discussion about whether this is a good rule or not, and that's a discussion for the rulemaking process. Here at the penalty matrix stage, we're just trying to classify the violations according to how serious they are. One other thing that the penalty matrix is not, it does not represent the entire enforcement process. The majority of cases that are resolved in the enforcement division are not even subject to this penalty matrix because they're resolved by some informal method. Either the contractor and the consumer have made peace, the contractor has paid them restitution perhaps, or gone back and made repairs that have satisfied the consumer, and those cases sometimes are closed informally as resolved with no penalty or license sanction being pursued. Other cases are closed with a finding that there's not enough evidence to prove a violation. So all of those cases that are closed without going the route of seeking an administrative penalty or a sanction, they're not reflected anywhere in here. This penalty matrix only applies if we go that formal route and seek formal enforcement action. Does that make sense? The air conditioning and refrigeration contractors penalty matrix was last updated and published in July of 2012. So since then, a couple of changes have occurred in the law, and that's the reason we're here in front of you today, to update the matrix in accordance with the statutes and rules that have changed since then. Specifically, in 2013 legislative session, Senate Bill 383 was passed. It was effective in June of 2013. I'm echoing here. And that bill made changes to the air conditioning law that repealed provisions in the statute relating to the sale and use of refrigerants. After that bill was passed, there were some rule changes that happened to further bring the rules in line with that law change. Those rules changes were effective in January of 2014 and in August of 2014. So some of the changes you'll see in the matrix today are simply reflective of those law changes. We also made some other changes in the matrix that were just general cleanup. We improved the language that is used to describe some of the violations in the matrix. We added a few violations that have been in the law for a really long time but had been left out of the previous matrix. Another significant change that you'll see is that we added subject matter headings within each class. If you look at the matrix, you'll see Class A, and you'll see the possible violations, and then you'll see a whole bunch of violations listed under there. Well, before they were just all listed, and you had to scour through and read each one to kind of find what you might be looking for. So we added these subject matter headings, like see the heading that says administrative violations, and then the one that says advertising violations and public notice violation. We added those to make it easier for a user to pinpoint the particular violation they might be trying to find out about without having to read through the whole thing and get lost in a lot of detail. So I'm hoping those will be helpful. We've used those in other programs, matrices, and they have been very well received. One thing we didn't do, we did not change any of the penalty amounts or license sanctions that were applicable to any of the violations. If you desire to talk about those, we'll be happy to, but I'm not intending to because we didn't think it was necessary to change any of them. I would like to walk you through the changes we made in the matrix, and as we're doing this, here's what I need from you. The violations within each class should be about the same level of seriousness. That's the whole point of the classification system. If you see a violation that you feel is in the wrong class, either it's less serious than the other things that are in that class, or you think it's more serious than the other things in that class, please tell us. This is one of the most important ways that you can help impact the enforcement that happens in this program, is helping us classify the violations correctly. And also, as we're moving through, pay attention to those new subject matter headings. If you think any of those are unclear or they could be described in a better way, please tell us, because they're intended to bring greater clarity. They're not intended to bring confusion. So help us with that if you see a need for some improvement. At the end of the day, what we're going to be requesting from you is that you vote to recommend to the commission that this penalty matrix be approved and published as part of TDLR's enforcement plan. So let me just walk you through, and this introduction is probably going to take longer than the walkthrough of the violations because it's just really not that big of a deal, the changes that we've made. In Class A, anywhere you see struck out language, like this first violation under Class A, you'll see those are violations that used to be a violation but now are no longer a violation according to the law. This first one that we struck through, failed to provide registration and picture identification to the seller when purchasing refrigerant. That was removed from the law in that 2013 legislation that I spoke about a minute ago. So that needs to come out of here because that's no longer a violation. Under the heading of administrative violations, we added one that it's not a new requirement, it's just something that we left out of an old version of the matrix. The fail to notify the department that a licensee has left the company within 30 days. That's been a violation for a long time, but we simply had neglected to include it last time we did a matrix update. Moving on to Class B. This is actually a substantive change. This violation that struck through failure to provide direct personal supervision, that is still in the law. However, we felt that it was inappropriately classified as a Class B. So you'll see a couple of pages later that we've moved that violation up to Class C. And I'll talk about that some more when we get to it. Under administrative violations and records violations, you see that we have changed the language a little bit. Instead of saying failure to, we changed it to failed to. And that was simply to be consistent throughout the document because we had both forms of the language in various places and we wanted to be a little more consistent. On the third page, we're still in Class B under the heading of mechanical integrity violation. For a long time, we've had language in here that said fail to obtain a permit or call for an inspection. And my prosecutors have pointed out to me that the requirement of calling for an inspection is not actually a requirement that is specified in any code. It's not specified in our statute or rules, and it's also not specified in any code. It is a practice that has been accepted as common. However, we have to enforce laws and codes as they're written. So the requirement to obtain a permit is clearly specified in codes, but not the call for inspection. So that's why that is struck through. Under the unlicensed activity heading, you'll see we just added a little language to clarify and improve the way some of the violations were stated to include not only performing various kinds of unlicensed activity, but also offering to perform. On the subject of unlicensed activity, you'll see that there are a block of unlicensed activity violations in Class B, which is what we're looking at right now. There are also some in Class C, which is at the bottom of the next page. And the difference there, the more serious forms of unlicensed activity, the truly unlicensed individual who's never been educated, who's not insured, we don't know anything about his qualifications, those more serious violations for unlicensed activity will be in Class C, subject to higher penalties. The ones in Class B are things like performing outside of the classification of your license or performing while your license is expired. We've also added, you'll see that next to the bottom bullet under unlicensed activity, still in Class B here, has to do with biomedical remediation. We added another violation underneath that we think should have been in there all along, but we just kind of failed to include it before now. The provisions of that Rule 75-100C, they set out a list of requirements that as long as you don't do these things while you're doing duct cleaning, it's okay to do the duct cleaning without having a license. And then there's another provision under that talks about biomedical remediation. Well, we always had biomedical remediation mentioned in the matrix, but we never did really talk about the duct cleaning part. So we added this to say that if you do any of those things while you're doing your duct cleaning, then you do have to have a license, essentially. So that's what this violation is about that we added. Under improper use of a license, you'll see some language cleanup there. On the third bullet in particular, that's the same violation. We just improved the language to state it more clearly, to include the full picture of what the violation is. You assigned your license, but you're not an employee or owner, and you're not working full-time at that company or the permanent office of that company. Under Class C, you'll see another violation that we struck that had to do with the refrigerant requirement, which has been removed from the law. Under mechanical integrity violations, here's where we added, at the very end, the last bullet, here's where we added that violation that we had removed from the earlier class. We felt like failing to provide supervision of work requiring a license was kind of a big deal, and we thought it was more of a big deal than Class B. We thought it was more consistent or more same level of seriousness as these other type violations here, like failing to provide proper installation service or mechanical integrity, failing to comply with a municipal code or ordinance, et cetera. So if you agree with that change, that's great. If not, we can definitely talk about it. Under misrepresentation, here again, we improved the language of a violation that's been a violation for a really long time. We just wanted to clarify the way it was described here. On the second bullet, made a fraudulent promise or false statement to induce a person to contract for services. Going through the next little section of bullets, there's just some cleanups on the language. And then on Class D, the very last bullet that's there, failed to pay the department for a dishonored check, and you'll see that check has been changed to payment. This is a violation that comes into effect when someone pays their licensing fee with a check, or in today's world with a credit card, and then that payment is dishonored. In those circumstances, our financial services division will make contact with that person. They will send several letters, they're very diligent about it, and try to get them to make that payment right. If they don't make that payment right, then eventually the matter is referred to the enforcement division. And we make more diligent efforts to try to get that person to make the payment right. But ultimately, if they don't, the action we're going to take is to revoke the license. The reason being, they haven't satisfied the requirement of paying a license fee if their form of payment was rejected by the bank or whatever. So this change from check to payment just reflects a change in the rule, which is in Chapter 60 rules of the agency. That rule language was updated to not only refer to checks, but to refer more generally to other forms of payment. So that's what that's about. That concludes all the changes that we made in the matrix. Ultimately, as I said, what I'm asking for you to do today is to vote to recommend that the commission approve these changes so that this penalty matrix can be published as part of the agency's enforcement plan. I am happy to answer any questions if you have them at this time. Yes, sir.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I feel like improper use of a license should be more serious than a B penalty. I mean, these people are out there doing our work without a license, so, you know, I feel like that should be a higher penalty. The other question I have is under an A violation, why is the second violation, first violation's up to $1,000, second violation's $500 to $2,000? Why would it be potentially less than a first violation?
Okay, I'll answer your second question first. On the ranges of penalties or sanctions for the first violation, second, and third, each one of those is represented as a range of possibles. So you'll see on Class A, the first violation, the lowest possible thing that can happen is not even a penalty. It's a reprimand. A reprimand is essentially it's a letter that is signed by our executive director that says, we know you did something wrong, don't do that again. So that's the lowest possible outcome. And then for the first violation, instead of that, they could also face a penalty of up to $1,000. So you'll see as you look through, the bottom number of the range in every classification usually is lower than the top number of the previous class, and that's just to give us wiggle room, because if we, in the first violation against somebody, if we had only given them a reprimand, then the second time we penalize them, we may only want to penalize them for $500 depending on what the violation is. As we go up from first violation to second to third, in the next case, the second case or the third case, we're always going to seek a penalty that's higher than what we hit them for the previous time. But these ranges are there to give us a little discretion to take into account how serious the violation is, other circumstances like what the person may have done to fix the violation, how responsive they were during our investigation process, et cetera.
Christine?
Yes, sir.
I guess I got a hypothetical here for you. Suppose that a person has an administrative violation and also an advertising violation. Is that two first-time violations, or would one of those count as the second violation?
If they came to our attention in the same case, or two different cases that we were working at the same time, we would most likely, if we were going to seek a penalty, we would combine those into a single notice of violation, and all of them taken together would be considered the first violation.
Okay, thank you.
If they happened at separate points in time, if we had, a case becomes a second violation if it happens later in time than we have penalized somebody for a first violation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I have a follow-up then. If a person creates, say, an administrative violation, several years later, they have another violation, is that considered a second time for them then? Or
As long
second?
as they were penalized for the first one, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
I wanted to get back to Mr. Rosenberg's first comment about the Class B. It is Class B, right? Yes.
Yes.
The Class B grouping of violations called improper use of license. They're on the third page of your draft, right above the Class C heading. Are you proposing that these be moved up just as a whole group to a higher class?
Yeah, it just seems like that's a pretty major issue. You know, someone using or doing our work without a license should be underneath in a Class C at least.
Okay. The violations that are included there include allowing someone else to use your license who's not an employee or subcontractor. Perhaps sometimes we see this in the context of allowing somebody else to use your license to pull a permit. Sometimes we see this in the form of advertising. You've allowed someone else to use your license number to advertise. Assigning your license to more than one permanent office or more than one company, that's a violation by a licensed person, but he's kind of spreading himself too thin according to what the statute allows. The one we talked about, assigning your license to a company, but you're not an employee or an owner, and you're not working full-time for that company. So I think Bill has loosely referred to that as the rent-a-license situation. Or the flip side of that, a company that's using a license that's not assigned to them, or using a location other than a permanent office to contract for sales or service. I guess I would ask, if you are proposing that, then I would ask that would be part of what the board needs to discuss as a group and decide as a group if you all want to make that change to move that grouping up to Class C.
For clarification, you have unlicensed activity and improper use of the license. Which were you proposing to move up to Class C, the improper or unlicensed? Because it sounded more like you were talking about unlicensed activity.
Well, the improper use of a license.
The improper use of a license generally is a violation that's going to be committed by a licensee who's either not properly assigned to a company or he's letting somebody use his license to do something that maybe they couldn't otherwise do. So I can see maybe how you would distinguish that from these other forms of unlicensed activity here where someone's operating perhaps with an expired license. I can understand how you think this might be a little more serious.
So you're proposing moving the entire improper use of license up to Class C?
Yeah.
Okay. Any more discussion on that?
I would agree.
anything else, we'll keep this in mind as we make the motion. Are there any more comments?
I believe there was someone over here who had another question or comment.
That was me.
But did you already?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Just for clarification real quick, going along with what he was saying, if you have an individual that today is penalized or reprimanded, however, for not supplying an insurance certificate, which is a Class A, then 6 months later, possibly didn't notify of the Department of an address change, is that a first and second, or since they're different penalties, are they both first violations?
It would be a first and second if the person was penalized for the first one. We take sort of a global view of the violations. If we have done business with you one time in the enforcement division and that has resulted in a formal enforcement action, our theory is that was your opportunity to learn about the law and become better acquainted with what's required of you. So if we see you again for a second violation, even if it's in a different class, we're going to treat that as a second violation. So the first, second, or third is simply chronological. It's not limited to what the specific violation was.
Okay.
Again, a follow-up question, if I may. If a guy has a violation 10 years ago and he has one again today, and he was penalized under both conditions, is that a second violation?
We limit ourselves to looking back 3 years for a first or previous violation.
Thank you.
What was it, 2-3 years ago, we changed the penalty matrix. We basically doubled the top end of everything, left on y'all's recommendation, the bottom end the same.
Yes.
Is that giving you some teeth to help enforce, to discourage?
I think it is. I think that the penalties that we see in air conditioning cases are noticeably higher than what we see in some other programs. And I think it has helped to perhaps indicate how seriously the agency takes the violations that we see in these cases.
I'd just like to make one note, just looking at improper use of a license, just kind of thinking about, I don't know, as an inspector, I'm always looking at life, health, safety, and priority, you know. And, yeah, improper use of a license, yeah, it's kind of a big deal, but I'm looking at the Class C and beyond kind of deal more with what I would consider life, health, safety issues, where either unlicensed work or just bad work. I don't know that somebody who has a proper license, who maybe just not using it correctly, would necessarily need to fall into that classification. I could see the reasoning for keeping it as a Class B, is what I'm saying. I don't know that I disagree with that. I mean, I understand your point, but I don't know that I necessarily agree that it's, I think it's in the right place, to be honest with you.
Okay.
From my standpoint.
Regarding the improper use of a license, let's say allowed someone else to use a license, in the process you go out and do the inspection, and you discover that they didn't follow the municipal code or ordinance, or they installed the gas piping other than it's permitted, do you start stacking fines at that point?
The person who actually did the work would be subject to possible penalties for those violations that you described. The allowing someone else to use the license would be a separate case against whatever licensee did that.
I believe I actually have a bigger concern with unlicensed activity than improper use of a license. It seems like unlicensed activity tends more to people that don't have a license going out, rather than misassigning a license, they're actually going out and doing the work. Just your comment, Michael.
I think both unlicensed activity and improper use of license. But I see his point. It's not improper use of a license is not a health issue per se. It's just a dishonest issue, and health is the most important, health and safety. But again, unlicensed activity and improper use of a license is just dishonesty, which is what we're trying to fight.
And there is a second tier of that unlicensed activity where it's an unlicensed activity, but it's more severe.
Right.
And I could see, if I'm a licensed contractor and I just let my license lapse, and I was absent-minded, oops, sorry, yeah, fine me. Probably shouldn't be as severe as somebody out there who's maliciously just doing work unlicensed.
Right.
And I run into that in city inspections all the time. I've got contractors who have a permit and their license expires while they have an active permit, For some reason that permit expires and they can't reactivate that permit because their license is expired. Well, call them up, hey, you need to take care of this. Does that warrant them getting a more severe penalty? Probably not.
Right.
It's my 2 cents.
Are you going, Mr. Rosenberg, you want to go ahead and stick with your?
I just wanted to give my opinion. It's my opinion, and I'm okay moving forward.
With
Without
leaving
moving
that
it, we can
grouping
leave it, yeah.
in Class
That's
B?
fine, yep.
Okay.
Any more questions or comments?
I move we recommend this to the commission.
Seconded?
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, sir. Gentlemen.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is recommendation for agenda items for the next board meeting. This is where we have an opportunity to direct this board and the commission. And we're looking to staff.
I'll put the video on the next meeting.
We'll put the video on the next meeting. Okay, discussion of date, time, and location. We have no legal obligation at this point. There's no rules have been posted that we need to.
So, Mr. Chair, there's no impending need to meet in the next month, 2 months or so, but what we'll do is we'll reach out to you and see if there's a desire to meet maybe around the first of the year.
Okay, that's great. We'll wait to hear from y'all. We all want to come back as much as we can.
I know.
We'll wait to hear from y'all.
We will be going into strategic planning season around December through February, so there will be opportunities to have some discussions about where we're going as an agency and where the industry is going.
Great. Again, I want to thank everybody, the new members, for agreeing to participate in this high salary position. We really enjoy having you on the board. This time, I'd like to adjourn the meeting.